Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well because today we're looking at the debut album from 2001 from Liars. Big long title here. They threw us all in a trench and stuck a monument on top, showing off the back. Not that there's a lot to show off. Uh, it's one of those things. Put the track list. There is the track listing, but it's on the inside. It's not even on the inside. It's on the insert, inside the inside. Like I said, this is the debut album from Liars. Came out October 30th, 2001. Was recorded between June and July of the same year. Who are Liars? Now they do all kinds of music, but at the time for their debut, they're doing dance punk, post-punk revival, noise rock, some experimental stuff, and that's not that descriptive if you're not too sure. But I do think dance punk is probably the most specific we can get, and especially dance punk from this time period. So let's go back. Let's go back a few decades, early 2000s. So what is dance punk? That's kind of a term that's around kind of in the 80s. It's a term we still use now for some genres, but I think very specifically at that time period, we're having that retro rock revival, right? Groups like Wolfmother, and actually even now with Greta Van Fleet, we're still seeing that kind of late 70s heavy rock revival carrying through. We saw that with punk as well. So I think the extension of that, we get almost like a CBGB's kind of revival. So we get people looking at bands like Blondie and the Talking Heads, and we're infusing that with groups like the Strokes and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, and we're kind of mushing that together, and you have dance punk. So if you think of this, you can outside. Death from Above, 1970 was another example. There's a few other groups at this time period doing similar kind of music. It's disco inspired, but it's grungy and it's kind of trashy and aggressive. So kind of take those influences. I like to think of taking, Blondie and Nirvana or something and mushing it together. And that's how I would describe dance punk from this time period. Uh, Throw in the influences of, Sony megapixel cameras becoming more affordable for people to have. People making bad choices and getting mustache finger tattoos. That's another great example of that kind of culture around the time. We got the scene. All right. So on this debut, they were with their original lineup, which would change a little bit throughout time, just like their sound. So I have the singer Angus Andrew, guitarist Aaron Hemphill on bass. You have Pat Knocker, who's actually right now in the band. These are Powers, and drummer Ron Albertson. As well on here, I feel there's a bit of influence of like Brit rock. If you think of kind of Blur at their noisiest, stuff like that. I think that's on here as well. So this album, a little over 50 minutes, 30 minutes of that is one track. And we'll get to that track, but we'll go through the others real quick, and then we'll spend a long time, not really, on that last one. So we start with Grown Men Don't Fall in the River, just like that, 3 minutes. It starts with like a lot of discordant kind of whimpering, and then it really builds to a bang with a really declarative opening statement of, can you hear us? And that's just a really cool way to start your album, and it really sets the stage for what's coming up next. And just everything really works so well together. You've got these kind of raw, lo-fi, crunchy vocals with the instrumentation. But for me, it's actually the bass playing on here that's the standout throughout the entire album. I think the bass is what really carries it. The next track is Mr. You're on Fire, Mr. at 2 minutes, a little over 2 minutes. That's a really cool song. I feel like it's probably the most single worthy. It's the most maybe accessible. That doesn't mean it's a bad track. It's a really good track. It's the most accessible on it. In fact, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, who this band would actually tour with around this time, they have a cover of the song "Mr. You're on Fire, Mr." And it was released as a B-side for the single "Pin." Next, we have "Loose Nuts on the Velodrome." Somehow, that's a very evocative title for the song. Don't know how that's an evocative title for the song, but it sounds like that. When I listen to the song, it makes me think, one, this album has a very haunting, kind of menacing feeling to it, but this song in particular, it feels like you're being chased by an angry ghost on a bike, and like you're not on the bike, but the ghost is on the bike. I don't know why a ghost would need a bike. It's like when Sonic drives a car, presumably they're faster without it, but I'm not here to argue with the evocative imagery of the band. I'm just here to share the good news. That's a good track. Next, we have The Garden Was Crowded and Outside, just under 3 minutes long. It has this kind of artsy use of field recordings, a little more experimental, kind of, but not quite, similar to if you've heard some of Can's early recordings, like Tago Mago or stuff like that, or Future Days. Not quite that out there, but similar, because then it goes into this sort of pulsating bass line that feels a little bit uncomfortable. And at that point, it's almost like a Primus song. It feels kind of Primus-y. So if you're into Primus when they're at their most psychedelic, that would be a cool track to check out. Now we go to Tumbling Walls Buried Me in the Debris. It says on here it's a vocal cover of an ESG song, which is Emerald, Sapphire, and Gold, who are kind of one of the originators of dance punk as a genre, really influential. And this song has actually been sampled a myriad of times. It's not really a vocal cover, so maybe a misunderstanding. It's a musical cover. The track doesn't actually have vocals. They added vocals to it. So maybe vocal cover means something that I don't know. But essentially, it's an instrumentation version. They cover the music of that track. The track is UFO from a 1991 release from the band, and then they added their own lyrics. It's a cool song. Now we go to Nothing Is Ever Lost or Can Be Lost, My Science Friend. Really cool titles on this album. Just over 3 minutes long. There's some really good drumming on this. I think for that track, that's where the drums stand out more than anything. It's got this really cool, like, consistent groove, and it feels like a bit of a lower energy track on here. It's probably the mellowest on this album, but that's okay. It's not disruptive. It feels good to actually take a chance to catch our breath, because we've needed that. I mean, the album's starting to wind down, and we need to kind of check in with ourselves for a bit. Next up is maybe the last traditional song on the album. It's We Live Northeast of Compton, just over 3 minutes long. It starts with these backwards noises and leads into this really fun and catchy rhythm guitar bit. The guitar sting comes in right at the perfect time, where like you're bobbing your head and you're grooving, and in your mind you're like, you know what we need? We need like a guitar to just jump in here, and it does, and it's just a really satisfying and well put together song. Next up, we go to Why Midnight Walked But Didn't Ring Her Bell. This is just under a minute long. It's an ambient come down from the next track. They sort of flow into each other. It's not anything super special on its own, but it makes sense within the flow of the album. Next up is This Dust Makes That Mud. This is the 30-minute long track. So no, it's not like a prog rock epic. At 30 minutes, that would be put like most prog bands don't do 30-minute long songs. It's a song that's about 8 minutes long, actually a little bit under, but it loops. So I kind of wrote down how it loops, because if you had this on CD, if you had this on vinyl, it would loop differently. So the LP version of This Dust Makes That Mud is approximately 8 minutes and 30 seconds and ends in a locked groove. So if you've ever seen a record, you know that they've got indents, and that's how the music plays. You can have a locked groove, so it kind of loops back around itself, which is really cool if you ever get a record that does that. The CD version goes to 8:05, and then it digitally loops the same 2-bar phrase until the half-hour mark. And then it pretends to slow down like a record player would. So it digitally simulates that kind of whirring effect. So that's the album. I mean, the half-hour track aside, it's breezes by. It's pretty quick. And that half-hour track, because it's looping, sometimes you don't even notice it's looping. It's just kind of ambiently there in the background with this sort of like very repetitious, haunting melody. It's kind of cool sometimes when you don't even realize that you're listening to it, but it's in your brain. But who would I recommend this to? If you haven't heard it, this is a really cool debut album. They would switch gears really rapidly as a band. So if you liked this sound, they kind of revisit it here and there, but generally speaking, this is them at their most kind of raw rock and roll aggressive sound. But if you're into groups like Can or krautrock kind of stuff, Radiohead at their most experimental, so maybe kind of like the rockiest parts of In Rainbows or King of Limbs, check this out. If you're into kind of that early 2000s alternative indie rock scene and you haven't heard these guys, check it out. I think it's super worth your time to discover another group from that period. And this is, yeah, just something to check out. I think it's a band that not a lot of people know about, CD not a lot of people know about, but a sound that a lot of people enjoyed and was very influential. And I think we're seeing a bit of that come back as we're seeing kind of the 90s right now having a bit of a minute. I think we are seeing that flesh into late 90s sounds having a bit of a minute, which does eventually mean we're going to get back into this as a trend, which I'm here for because it's cool stuff. That said, hope you have a great day. I'm gonna have a great day, and I'm gonna go listen to some half-hour long looping tracks. Catch you next time.